Mr. William Kniffin, a grape grower in the Hudson Valley region of New York State, devised a training system for grapevines that was used extensively for more than a half a century. Today we call it the Forearm Kniffin Training System for grapevines. And what was it about this training system that was so revolutionary? Well, here is a schematic of Forearm Kniffin. And we can see that there are renewal zones at about 42 inches above height in this schematic, where we have canes placed out, a wire in both directions with renewal spurs just below those canes, and we have another renewal zone right at the top of the trellis, canes going out in both directions with renewal spurs below those. Now, this was originally called True Kniffin or Four Cane Kniffin. Today we call it Forearm Kniffin, even though it really doesn't involve arms as much as canes out wires. So what was so revolutionary about Forearm Kniffin training? Well, here's the high renewal training system that was one of the grapevine training systems used extensively before Mr. Kniffin came up with Forearm Kniffin. And if we look at this closely, we can see that the renewal zone is only 18 inches off the ground. And from that renewal zone, a cane is trained out each direction on an 18-inch wire, and shoots that come from that cane are then positioned upwards on the trellis. Similarly, another training system of the day before Forearm Kniffin was called horizontal arm spur training, and it involved a cordon out a wire 18 inches off the ground, and there were 2 to 3 node spurs on that cordon that gave rise to shoots that grew up vertically on the trellis. So that low renewal zone all along that cordon was really low compared to the innovation of Forearm Kniffin. Well, the innovation of Forearm Kniffin was that it placed its renewal zones much higher on the trellis than those old training systems, with renewal zones at the mid-height and right at the top of the trellis. And this led to increased fruitfulness of those renewal zones because they were in the sunlight better than those old training systems with low renewal zones. So this was so innovative that this system was very, very prevalent for decades and decades and way into the 20th century. Well, there were lots of variations of Forearm Kniffin. This is a graphic representation of 6-arm Kniffin. And there were 8-arm Kniffins and 10-arm Kniffins too, because back in the day, grapevines were very weak and small generally because there was poor weed control. We didn't have fertilization practices like we do today. And so in order to get a fair amount of growth distributed vertically on the trellis, we added more arms and made 4, 6, 8-arm Kniffins. Here's a picture of 6-arm Kniffin in a Canadian vineyard. And this was very popular and perhaps still is today, I don't really know, on the heavier clay soils in the Ontario province area. Because of the heavy clay soils, vine growth is weak, as you can see, and in order to get some vertical distribution of growth, many growers used 6-arm Kniffin training. Well, let's talk advantages and disadvantages of Forearm Kniffin. It is a simple system to establish and maintain, and so it is appealing to growers to look at the system and say, okay, maybe I should go with that. And it works well with small to medium-sized vines. No problem there. It's compatible with vines that experience moderate winter injury because you can work your way around renewing trunks and still have the arms ready to fill the trellis wires each year. Well, the disadvantages of forearm Kniffin is that it's not mechanizable, and that's involved with its requirement of long cane pruning and annual tying that must be done every year with this system. And it's not compatible with canopy management practices of shoot positioning and leaf removal that are so important to us in modern viticulture. And it's not suitable for large vines, and we're going to dwell on that for just a minute. This is a big, bushy Cabernet Franc vine that has been trained to forearm Kniffin. If we look underneath, we can see that the fruit is buried in the shade, that it does not have the benefit of good sunlight exposure on the fruit, and as is typical of forearm Kniffin with large vines, there is a reduced fruitfulness on those lower arms. So you can see most of the fruit is at the top of the trellis anyway. And the arms down lower on the trellis on large vines become increasingly shaded. And that's really what led to the demise of the popularity of forearm Kniffin, because those lower arms just didn't pull their weight anymore. Actually, what forearm Kniffin evolved to was this. Does it look familiar? This was originally called two-arm Kniffin, and it was the starting point for umbrella Kniffin that we've already presented in an earlier video, where the renewal zone is very near to the top of the trellis. Why? Because as vine size got larger, the lower arms on forearm Kniffin just didn't perform well, so eventually the whole renewal zone moved up higher and higher on the trellis, and it started with this two-arm Kniffin, and then variations of that became umbrella Kniffin. So if we go back to the schematic and we look at this, we want to say that this is really not a system that has widespread utilization today. In summary then, the advantages of forearm Kniffin include a simple system to establish and maintain. It works well with small to medium-sized vines. It's compatible with vines that experience moderate winter injury. The disadvantages include that it's not mechanizable, that it requires long cane pruning and annual tying, that it's not compatible with canopy management practices of shoot positioning and leaf removal, and it's not suitable at all for large vines. Well, there you have it, folks. That's the Forearm Kniffin training system, which might be good for a backyard grower, but for most commercial growers, we would not recommend this training system today. Until next time, happy grape growing.